The fluorescent lights in the Pentagon hearing room burned with a cold steadiness that seemed designed to wash the humanity from anyone sitting beneath them. Their glare flattened color and cast hard shadows across the faces of the officers, arranged behind the long mahogany table. Each man and woman at that table carried themselves as though they were the living embodiment of institutional weight. Uniforms pressed so sharply they seemed to cut the air. Their medals and ribbons glimmered faintly in the harsh light, each polished surface reflecting fragments of authority. At the center, General Thaddeus Blackwood presided with deliberate calm, his steel-gray eyes trained on the woman seated alone at the other end of the chamber. Majorisol da Kestrel, Satramrod Strait. Her Air Force dress blues immaculate, despite the 3 days of near-sleepless nights that had led to this moment. Her posture was deliberate, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Her expression, a careful mask. Inside, tension gathered like storm clouds. But she betrayed nothing. She had learned long ago that silence could be its own form of resistance, as Blackwood's voice rolled across the room, clipped and heavy with disdain. She absorbed the words without flinching. Reckless, insubordinate, a danger to her service and her crew, each word struck like artillery. But her face remained stone. On the screen behind the panel, a satellite image filled the space with grainy evidence. The valley was scarred by craters, an airfield gutted and scorched by bombardment, a wrecked fuselage blackened by fire. The image froze. Labeled Operation Hollow Sky, Blackwood gestured toward it with a flick of his hand. This runway was deemed unusable by intelligence review. It declared, yet you attempted to land a C-17 Globemaster on it. An aircraft not designed for such conditions? You risked crew and asset without authorization. His words rang against the walls, clipped and precise. The others at the table sat mostly in silence, their eyes fixed on Kestrel. Some looked at her with thinly veiled contempt. Others with the careful neutrality of those unwilling to risk association. One colonel leaned forward, curiosity flashing briefly, asking about the technical execution of her landing, before Blackwood silenced him with a glance sharp enough to cut steel. The message was clear. This was not a discussion, it was an execution of reputation. Kestrel drew in a slow breath, steady enough to keep the tremor of anger out of her voice. "Sir," she replied, her words measured. SEAL Team 7 was stranded in hostile territory without extraction. Their calls went unanswered. The situation called for immediate action. Her tone was calm. Her gaze locked onto Blackwood's, refusing to yield. Silence fell like a curtain. For a moment, even the hum of the air conditioning seemed too loud. Blackwood countered without hesitation. "You were ordered to stand down. The risk you took borders on miraculous survival, but miracles do not excuse insubordination." His jaw tightened as he snapped the folder closed. The accusation, final and damning, reverberated through the space. Isolde kept her eyes steady. She did not let her glance waver, though the fluorescent lights revealed a small detail the others might not have noticed. Just beneath the edge of her sleeve, barely visible, a non-standard medal glimmered for a moment. It was out of place, not matching her official decorations, and yet she wore it as though it belonged there more than any ribbon pinned by command. The object spoke silently, a token of something larger, something not recognized in the records. The mahogany table stretched between her and the men who condemned her, a polished symbol of distance and power. Around here, the room pressed down with the full weight of an institution eager to erase her defiance. Yet she refused to bow. She sat in silence. And in that silence was a defiance, sharper than words. In that moment, Major Isolde Kestrel understood. This was not judgment of a mistake. This was betrayal written in procedure, scapegoat wrapped in formality. The tribunal chamber dissolved in Isolde Kestrel's mind, and she was back in the cockpit. The glow of instruments painted her face in hues of green and amber, while the outside world stretched into endless black. Radio chatter had gone thin hours ago, replaced only by fragments of broken calls. Then came the voice that would not leave her memory. This is 7. We are still pinned. Ammunition low. Anyone copy. The desperation was raw, echoing against static. Command never answered. Co-pilot Orion Reeve set rigget beside her, his hands hovering over the throttles. His voice was low, urgent, meant to tether her to reason. Major, this is madness. They said, the strip is gone. Craters everywhere. We can't land a Globemaster down there. His tone carried the fear of a man who knew the limits of physics and understood how close they stood to shattering them. Isolde's grip tightened on the yoke, knuckles whitening under her gloves. The data scrolling across her panel showed peaks rising like blades around the valley, the air currents shifting with lethal unpredictability. She thought of the calls that Command ignored, thought of the men fighting below with no way out. If we don't, they die, she said, her voice firm and unshaken. It was not bravado. It was simple calculation. Reeve shook his head, muttering, "It's suicide." The warning alarms flared as she banked the C-17 into descent. The aircraft trembled under the shift, engines straining against gravity and air pressure. Each turn between the mountains narrowed into a needle's eye. Radar painting, jagged ridges in angry red arcs. Her eyes flicked between gauges and the black void outside. Every nerve locked to precision. On the ground, SEAL Team 7 heard it first, as a distant thunder rolling through the night. Through night vision goggles, they scanned the darkness. Disbelief rising as the massive transport cut between cliffs. "No way," one muttered. The sergeant's voice snapped back. "Hold positions. Cover them when they land." Even battered and near-spent, they formed a perimeter, ready to buy seconds for survival. The runway came into view, or what remained of it, a cratered stretch of broken asphalt, fire scars still smoking, twisted metal scattered like bones. Reeve swore under his breath, bracing for impact. "We won't hold it. We'll tear the gear clean off." Isolde kept her tone level. "We'll hold." The aircraft screamed onto the ground, the impact rattling every bolt. Sparks flew as wheels struck broken pavement. One gear jarring against the rim of a crater, the cabin filled with the sound of tearing metal, alarms blaring in panicked unison. She forced the yoke steady, muscle locked, refusing to let the weight of 170,000 pounds drift from the narrow strip that remained. Outside, tracers cut the sky, enemy fire streaking past. The SEALs surged forward, weapon cracking, drawing fire away from the wounded aircraft. Reeve was shouting over the cacophony, reading damage readouts that grew worse with every second. Hydraulic pressure bleeding. Fuel leak flagged. "Patch teams out," Isolde commanded. Her crew spilled into the open, racing under the belly with tools and foam. Bullets kicked dirt around them. One mechanic, dragging a hose as another, fought with a bent panel. The SEALs fired in short bursts. Every round rationed. Every movement desperate. Isolde stayed in the seat, engines hot, eyes scanning the valley. She kept the turbines spooling, ready to pull the bird off the ground the moment repairs were patched enough to risk lift. She could feel her heartbeat hammering, but her hands were steady, her breathing deliberate. Minutes stretched like hours. Then came the shout through intercom, gear patched, fuel lines sealed for temporary lift. She did not hesitate. Strap in. Throttle forward. Engines howled. The transport lumbered down the fractured strip. Incoming fire hammered the valley, tracers lacing the night. A shell erupted near the tail, rocking the aircraft sideways. Reeve cursed, his hands bracing against the console. Isolde pulled every ounce of thrust, nose lifting, wheels tearing away from broken asphalt. The C-17 clawed into the air, heavy and slow, but rising from the ground. The SEALs watched it ascend through smoke and tracer fire. a steel giant defying death itself. One of them whispered, almost in disbelief, "She came for us." The memory faded, dissolving back into the sterile silence of the hearing room. The satellite images on the tribunal screen were only pale shadows of the night she lived through. Stripped of the fire, the roar, the choice. But Isolde remembered every second. The doors to the hearing room closed behind her with a hollow click that seemed to echo too long in the Pentagon's corridors. Major Isolde Kestrel stepped into the hallway, the sound of her polished shoes muted by the thick carpet. Yet each step carried the weight of accusation. Around her, uniformed personnel moved with purpose. Heads bent over files or tablets. Conversations hushed. None of them met her eyes. The avoidance was deliberate, as though even a glance might tether them to her disgrace. The air smelled faintly of antiseptic and paper, the sterile signature of bureaucracy. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, stretching long rectangles of white across walls, lined with framed photographs of decorated leaders. Their faces stared outward, frozen testaments to victories safely enshrined, while she, still living and breathing, was being quietly erased. She adjusted the strap of her folder against her side, her posture unyielding. To bend, even slightly, would be to admit the weight pressing down, yet the silence felt oppressive. It was not the silence of peace, but the silence of people who knew something had already been decided. She passed a pair of junior officers who quickly broke their conversation and looked away. Their sudden stillness, more revealing than words. Then a voice called after her, low but urgent, "Isolde." She turned. Colonel Ara Winslet approached, her mentor from years ago. Silver streaks, threading her once black hair. Ara moved with the ease of authority, but her eyes carried something sharper than command warning. They stepped into the shadow of a recessed alcove, away from the flow of bodies. "They want this buried," Ara said quietly. Her tone was clipped, restrained, as though even the walls might be listening. "They don't care about context. They don't care about the team you saved. They only care that you crossed them." Isolde studied hair, searching for cracks of hesitation. She found none. Then this was deliberate. She replied, her voice steady. Ara's expression hardened. "You always knew it could come to this. You embarrassed them by succeeding where their intelligence failed. That will not go unpunished." Isolde slid her hand into the inside pocket of her jacket and withdrew a small, black data drive. The plastic was scuffed, ordinary in appearance, but its weight in her palm felt heavier than any metal. "I pulled this before the records were altered," she said. "Communication log. Mission data. Enough to show they left SEAL Team 7 to die." Ara's eyes flicked to the drive, then back to Isolde's face. "Be careful. Evidence like that can vanish. And so can the people holding it." Her hand touched Isolde's arm, a brief gesture of solidarity, before she stepped back into the corridor flow and disappeared. Alone again, Isolde tucked the drive securely back into her pocket. Her heartbeat remained steady, controlled, but beneath it lay the hum of unease. She could feel the gaze of unseen observers, the institution itself, watching, waiting for her to falter. Every mirrored surface in the corridor reflected her image back at her, stretched and distorted, as though reminding her that nothing here was safe. Her phone buzzed. She drew it out, the vibration small against her palm. The screen lit with a message from an unmarked number. The words were simple, without explanation. "Arlington, Section 60, 1900 hours." For a moment she stared at it, the glow of the text, washing her face in pale light. Then she slipped the phone away, her expression unchanged. To anyone passing, she was simply another officer walking with purpose. Inside, however, she knew the path had shifted. The tribunal was not the end. It was the beginning of something far larger, a shadow war moving just beneath the surface. She walked on, spine unbent, her silence no longer just defiance. It was preparation. The evening air over Arlington carried the sharp scent of cut grass and stone, warmed by the day's sun. The cemetery stretched in rows of white markers, each one aligned with military precision, each a reminder of sacrifice carried quietly into history. Major Isolde Kestrel walked between them, her steps measured, her breath even, the weight of the message still turning in her mind. She had come expecting a shadowy figure with whispered instructions, another step in a conspiracy that had begun to coil around her career. What she found instead made her pause. Beneath the spreading branches of an old oak tree, a small group waited, their silhouettes sharpened in the fading light. Men and women in plain clothes, though their posture betrayed the discipline of long service. At the center stood a tall man with snow-white hair, his frame still carrying the authority of command, Admiral Malachi Frost. Retired, but unmistakable. Regarded her with a calm gravity that seemed to silence the air around him. Then her eyes caught the others, and the breath she drew froze in her chest. 6 figures she had last known, only through frantic radio calls and the smoke of a battlefield. SEAL Team 7. Alive. Standing before her. They were leaner, scarred, their faces etched by survival. But they were here. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Their eyes held hers, recognition carrying more power than words. Frost broke the silence. "You thought you were alone," he said, his voice even, carrying the authority of a man who had spent a lifetime shaping battles from the shadows. "You were not." Isolde studied the men, their presence dismantling weeks of official lies. "They said you were gone," she answered, her tone stripped of disbelief. It was simple truth spoken aloud. "They wanted us gone," said Seifer Thorne, the team's commander. His voice was quiet, but iron beneath. "We carried proof of shipments, weapons moving through channels no one would admit existed. The order came down to leave us behind." His gaze was steady. "You disobeyed that order." The weight of his words settled over her. What had been called recklessness in the hearing room was reframed here. Beneath the oak, as the choice that kept men alive who were never meant to survive, Frost stepped closer, his expression solemn. "Blackwood is not careless. He is compromised. This entire tribunal is his shield. You are the distraction. While they strip your wings, he moves his pieces into place." A SEAL stepped forward, his hand extended. In it lay a small American flag patch, edges frayed from wear. He pressed it into her palm without ceremony. "We don't have medals to give you," he said, "but we don't forget." The gesture struck deeper than any ribbon on a polished uniform. Isolde closed her hand over the patch, feeling its roughness against her skin. Around here, the quiet of Arlington deepened, the gravestones glowing faintly in twilight, silent witnesses to truths that never reached parades or newsprint. There were no cheers, no formal recognition, only the weight of eyes meeting hers in gratitude. A single salute rose from the SEALs, followed by another, until every man stood with hand to brow. Frost remained still, his silence carrying the gravitas of command. For the first time since the tribunal began, Isolde felt the iron chain of isolation loosen, replaced by the presence of a fraternity that existed beyond orders and beyond betrayal. She tucked the patch into her pocket. It was small, almost inconsequential, yet it carried more honor than the ribbons displayed in the hearing room. Her disgrace had not erased her worth. It had shielded something larger. The cemetery remained hushed as night settled, the oak swaying softly in the breeze. In that quiet, Isolde understood that she was no longer merely surviving accusations. She was part of a truth buried deep, waiting for its time to rise. The room was small, its only light spilling from the projector that cast flickering green across the walls. The SEALs gathered close, their faces hard and watchful, while Major Isolde Kestrel sat among them, her hands resting still on her knees. Zephyr Thorne pressed a key, and the first image filled the screen. Helmet camera footage. Rough and jittering, caught in the chaos of that night. Through the grainy night vision lens, the valley appeared as a jagged bowl of shadow, stitched with tracer fire. Voices shouted over static. Clipped and breathless. Rounds low, holding south line. The feed lurched as the operator dove behind a rock. Then came the thunder. Low at first, swelling into a roar that seemed to split the sky. The camera tilted upward, catching the massive silhouette of a C-17 Globemaster descending where no aircraft should have flown. Its engine howled. Turbulence, scattering dust and debris across the lens. Isolde watched in silence, her throat tight. From the cockpit she had seen only instruments and the narrowing strip of broken runway. Here, through their eyes, it looked like a miracle defying physics itself. The footage jolted forward. Impact, shaking the ground. The operator sprinted, breath ragged in the microphone. Cover the bird gunfire cracked. Bursts of light through green haze. Enemy tracers sliced overhead. Then, caught in the frantic frame, Isolde appeared, climbing down from the transport with a tool pack slung across her shoulder. Sprinting into the chaos, she bent under the fuselage, sparks flying as she worked on torn hydraulic lines. A voice in the recording muttered, "She's out there fixing it." Under fire, another barked back. "Then keep her covered." The sound of rifles firing in controlled bursts filled the air. The rhythm of men spending their last rounds not to hold ground but to shield one figure bent beneath steel. The footage caught a SEAL dragging a wounded mechanic back into cover, blood dark against fatigues. While Isolde emerged again, face streaked with dirt, eyes steady, she shouted something inaudible over the noise. Then signaled with her hand. Urgency, sharp even in silhouette. Engines spooled. Dust clouds swirling. In the darkened room, no one spoke. The footage rolled on, showing the lumbering liftoff, rounds sparking against wings, the heavy transport clawing skyward. The operator's voice whispered, half disbelief, half prayer. She did it. She actually did it. Thorne froze the video. The room returned to silence, only the projector fan whirring. He turned toward her, his scar catching the glow. From the ground, it wasn't reckless. It was the only thing standing between us and graves right here in Arlington. Isolde kept her gaze on the frozen image of herself bent beneath the aircraft. Her chest felt heavy, not with pride, but with the weight of what she now understood. It had never been only about stick and throttle, about muscle memory and flight systems. It had been a choice to stake everything on the belief that others' lives outweighed her orders. One of the younger SEALs leaned forward, his eyes tired but unwavering. "You need to know, ma'am, that night, we thought we were finished. Then we saw you under that bird, working while bullets hit the dirt around you. That's the picture burned in our heads, not the tribunal, not Blackwood's words. That." The image lingered on the wall, rough and blurred, but carrying a truth no official report could erase. The scarred landing gear patched enough to fly, the dust cloud lifting as engines roared, and the shadow of a woman who chose defiance when obedience meant death. For the first time since the hearing, Isolde felt something shift within her. The tribunal called her reckless, yet in their eyes, in their memories, she had been salvation. Legend was not built in orders obeyed, but in lives carried out of fire. The hearing chamber no longer resembled a military review board. It had been reshaped into something closer to a courtroom. Its air charged with tension. Rows of chairs were filled not only by officers in uniform, but by Justice Department lawyers, intelligence observers, and staff who moved with the clipped precision of people carrying secrets. The long mahogany table still dominated the room, but now stacks of folders, Screens and sealed envelopes cluttered its surface. The formality of ritual had been replaced by the procedural weight of judgment. General Thaddeus Blackwood sat at the center. As always, his uniform immaculate, his face carved into the expression of command authority. But beneath his stillness, something strained. He tapped a pen against a folder, the rhythm betraying a restlessness he could not entirely hide. Across from him, Majorisol d'Orchestral sat silent, her posture rigid. Her eyes focused not on Blackwood, but on the material being presented. For once, she was not the one under direct attack. The first evidence came in the form of satellite imagery, displayed side by side on the large screen. One showed the cratered runway before her landing, the other, a doctored version, scrubbed clean to support the claim that her decision had been reckless fantasy. A Justice Department lawyer explained the discrepancies in measured tones, pointing to metadata that proved alteration. The room shifted. Several officers exchanged uneasy glances, the certainty of accusation cracking. Next came the communications logs. Colonel Era Winslet had secured them, and now they were read aloud. Each message a wound opening in the fabric of Blackwood's authority. The ignored calls from SEAL Team 7, the delayed responses from command, the direct order that extraction was to be abandoned. The silence that followed was heavier than the words themselves. Zephyr Thorne took the stand, his bearing calm, despite the weight of the chamber. His testimony was not fiery. It was precise, methodical. The voice of a man accustomed to reporting facts in combat. He described their last stand, their ammunition dwindling, the sound of the transport engines cutting through chaos, the figure of Kestrel working under fire. His words carried no embellishment. They did not need any. The truth alone was enough to draw the sharp inhale of officers who had once dismissed the mission as exaggeration. Through it all, Blackwood's composure thinned. His pen snapped in his hand, plastic cracking under the pressure of his grip. He set the broken piece aside with controlled fury. But the gesture betrayed the tremor beneath his still surface. The final fracture came when Colonel Harrove was called to testify. His face was pale, his hands trembling as he clutched the folder before him. Sweat traced along his temple, visible even under the lights. He began with the expected denials, his voice too quick, too brittle. But as Keston pressed harder, his defenses collapsed. He admitted to falsifying reports under Blackwood's orders, to signing off on intelligence that redirected funds, to knowledge of weapons transfers routed through clandestine channels. His words spilled in halting rhythm, each confession striking like a hammer. The chamber froze in silence. Authority itself seemed to shudder. Blackwood's face darkened, rage flickering behind his eyes. But no words could undo the collapse. Justice Department officials conferred briefly. Their decision immediate. Arrest warrants were drawn, signed, and delivered to the military police, who stood by the door. When the order was read, Blackwood rose with deliberate slowness, his chin high, his voice controlled. "This is a mistake," he said. But the power had already shifted. The guards moved forward. He did not resist, but his silence was more dangerous than protest. Harrove, broken and pale, followed with his head lowered. The room remained hushed even after they were escorted out. The weight of betrayal lingered, pressing down on everyone present. The mask of power had crumbled, leaving only the raw face of truth. Major Isolde Kestrel remained seated, her hands still folded, her expression calm. Vindication was not triumph. It was heavier than accusation. She understood what the others were only beginning to see: institutions may conspire to bury truth, but under enough weight, the fractures always come. The chamber emptied slowly, as though the very walls were reluctant to release the weight of what had just transpired. Blackwood and his co-conspirators had been led away, flanked by military police whose boots struck the floor in measured rhythm. Their exit left behind a vacuum that no one seemed eager to fill. Officers shifted their papers, cleared their throats, and slipped out through the tall doors, each avoiding her eyes. Vindication, declared on record, did not feel like triumph. It felt like exhaustion wearing the mask of victory. Major Isolde Kestrel sat in the stillness, her hands resting on the sealed folder of evidence that had cracked the tribunal apart. The mahogany table gleamed under the same harsh lights, but its authority seemed hollow now. A stage that had already claimed too many reputations. At the far end of the room, Admiral Malachi Frost caught her gaze and gave a single nod. It was not ceremony. It was acknowledgement, quiet and restrained. Then he turned and departed without another word. When she stepped outside, the silence of the chamber gave way to chaos. The media had gathered like a storm. Cameras flashing, voices clashing and questions that blurred together. Was it worth the risk? Do you regret disobeying orders? What about the lives you endangered? Their words were accusations wrapped in curiosity, slicing at her with the same fervor Blackwood once carried. She kept her expression calm, her stride even, refusing to grant them anything more than her silence. Vindication in the official record had done nothing to stem the tide of public suspicion. To them, she remained a spectacle, a headline to be twisted and replayed. That night, her apartment was quiet except for the sound of her suitcase zipping shut. She folded her uniforms with the precision drilled into her, each crease sharp, each motion deliberata. Packing felt less like preparation for travel and more like dismantling a life piece by piece. On the table beside her lay the American flag patch. The seals had pressed into her palm at Arlington. Its edges were worn, threads fraying where it had been torn from a combat uniform. She touched it briefly, the fabric rough beneath her fingertips, and left it on top of her packed gear. Some honors carried more weight than official commendations. A knock broke the silence. When she opened the door, Zephyr Thorne stood there with his men, dressed in civilian clothes that did little to hide their bearing. None of them spoke at first. Then Thorne stepped forward and held out a small box. "We can't give you what they should have," he said, his tone even, but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "But we can give you this." Inside the box lay a Navy and Marine Corps medal, a ribbon deep red, its metal polished but unmarked by ceremony. It was unofficial, passed hand to hand without record. Yet it shone with a weight greater than the medals pinned in staged ceremonies. Thorne placed it in her palm, his gaze steady. "For saving us when no one else would." The others raised their hands in quiet salute. No words needed. Their faces carried the truth that official channels had tried to bury, that her defiance had been salvation, not crime. For a moment, the weight of fatigue lifted, replaced by the simple gravity of recognition given freely by those who had lived through the night she risked everything for. When they left, silence returned. She placed the medal beside the flag patch and sat alone, the city lights casting fractured patterns across her walls. Vindication had come, but it was not light and celebratory. It was heavy, bittersweet, a burden she would carry as long as the memory of that valley stayed alive in her. Her name was cleared, but her image remained twisted by rumor, her future uncertain. True vindication did not live in tribunals or headlines. It lived in the unrecorded gestures of those who knew. In the quiet exchange of symbols carried outside ceremony, that was enough. Yet even as she closed the suitcase, she understood the silence after storms never lasted. Weeks passed, and the noise of tribunals and headlines faded into the background hum of military life. Bases moved on. Reports were filed, and new rotations began. For Major Isolde Kestrel, the rhythm of service did not end with vindication or scandal. It simply continued, quiet and steady as it always had. On the flight line one morning, the air was sharp with jet fuel, and the golden light of early sun stretched long shadows across the tarmac. She walked in measured stride toward her aircraft, the massive C-17, waiting with its engines dormant, a giant at rest. A small group of younger pilots lingered nearby, watching her with the kind of hesitation reserved for legends they were still learning to believe. One finally approached. His voice tentative. "Ma'am, how did you hold it on that runway, the cratered one?" His words carried both awe and disbelief. "Isol da West." Her eyes lifting toward the aircraft's nose, she offered no grand speech, only a calm answer. "You trust the bird. You trust yourself. And when the math says impossible, you fly anyway." It was not instruction so much as reminder, the distilled truth of a night when calculations and orders gave way to choice. The young pilots nodded, their respect quiet but unmistakable. Already, whispers of the Kestrel run had begun to circulate, spoken in ready rooms and late-night hangars as an emblem of what could be done when rules bent beneath necessity. Later, inside the ready bay, she noticed an unofficial patch on a jacket left hanging. It showed the silhouette of a C-17 descending over a jagged strip, a circle of midnight blue stitched around it. Beneath, in thread almost too faint to read, were the words, "Runway or none." It was not sanctioned. It would never appear in official inventory. Yet it spread, hand to hand, a quiet token of defiance and endurance. Thorne and his SEALs shipped out again, their departure as unremarked by the press as their survival had been. Before leaving, he clasped her hand, the gesture short, his words fewer still. "You're trusted," he said simply. Trust was heavier than metals, and she accepted it with the same composure she carried in battle. Admiral Frost crossed her path once more in those weeks, his presence as deliberate as always. He did not speak of tribunals or conspiracies, only of assignments that lay outside the visible Air Force. His voice hinted at paths unmarked, doors she had not yet considered. He left her with a nod, the same quiet signal he had given in the tribunal chamber, as though confirming her place in something that endured beyond paperwork. When she finally climbed the ladder into her cockpit, she caught her reflection in the glass face calm, eyes steady, hair pulled back without ceremony. She placed the Navy medal on the dashboard beside the worn flag patch, both resting where sunlight could touch them. The engines roared alive, shaking the ground. The sound, both thunder and reassurance. As the C-17 lifted into sky, she felt no surge of triumph, only continuity. The horizon opened before her, pale and endless, bearing witness to lives carried forward and legends whispered in silence.